I want to tell you two stories about storms. Jesus and a bunch of guys in a boat, the 12 disciples. Both storms had winds and they had fear, but their endings were really different, and that's what's important. The first storm is in our Mark 4 260 journey story. We are on a journey through the New Testament in 2019. That is a chapter of the New Testament, Monday through Friday, weekends off, and we complete it in 2019. I can't tell how the Mark 4 storm story without telling first two other stories that go together. Mark 4, starting with verse 35, goes like this. On that day when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, and just as he was, and the other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Do you not care is a huge indictment on God's character. And that plays into this no faith issue. So keep these two phrases in mind. Do you not care? And do you have any faith? Those are really important. Let me finish. Verse 39. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down and became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Their no faith is revealed in this one statement. Who is this man? Faith is connected to knowing who this man is, Jesus. Think of the progression, because this is really important. A storm arises like it does in life, and fear comes. It could be the fear of tomorrow, fear of going to the doctor, fear of waiting for a certain phone call, fear of being single, fear of not getting pregnant, fear of the meeting with your supervisor, and if you're going to have a job tomorrow. These are all called storms. And if a storm produces fear and not trust, then we may have a faith issue. When storms drive you to fear instead of to God, faith has been punctured and it's leaking out somewhere. This storm that we talked about in Mark 4 ends with a question mark. It ends with questioning who God is. See, faith is a journey, and that's what these disciples are on. They ended their first Jesus boat ride with, "Who is this guy?" That's the question mark. If storms produce fear, then we have the faith problem. And if we have a faith problem, then it's a God issue. What does that mean? Knowing God increases faith. Always remember that. If I want my faith to increase, find out more about God and more about the character of God. One man said this, he said, "Feed your faith and your fears will starve to death." Faith is based on who God is. That's how you increase it. They didn't get an increase of faith from the last storm, just more questions about who he is. But here's the second storm story. Let's close with this from Matthew chapter 14. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. There's the similarity. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and saying, "Take courage, it's I, do not be afraid." Eventually he got into the boat and the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat, get this now, worshiped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." They worshiped him and said, "You are God's son." Remember our first boat story ends with a question mark. This one still has a storm, but it ends with worship. It would have been easier to worship earlier. If storms make me better worshipers, then so be it. It would just be a little bit easier to do it with music on Sundays, but that doesn't always happen that way. God wants you and my tests to end with praise and not with questions. It makes me think of this old Andre Crouch song that says this, "I thank God for the mountains and I thank him for the valleys. I thank him for," here it is, "the storms he brought me through. For if I'd never had a problem, I wouldn't know that God can solve them. I'd never know what faith in God can do." And then Andre sang this chorus, through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon his word." Man, those words are powerful. If I never had a problem, I would never know that God could solve them. There is a difference between praise and worship. Praise is telling others about how good God is and telling others what God has done. But worship is telling him who he is. If you know who he is, then you can know what he can do. As the wicked are hurt by the best things in life, so the godly are bettered by the worst things of life. Was what William Jenkins said, one of the great Puritans. Always remember, if a storm drives you, if life drives you into a storm, I don't want to come out questioning God. I want to come out worshiping God. Thank you for joining the 260 Journey.